Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. Today we're asking a big question, one that really challenges how we think about political leadership. Can a leader truly shine on the global stage, only to find themselves, well, stumbling in their own backyard? We're taking a closer look at Friedrich Merz, Germany's relatively new chancellor, and a recent piece from The Economist. It paints a rather stark picture of his first 100 days. The suggestion is he's navigating international waters pretty skillfully, but struggling, really struggling, to keep his own ship steady back home.
Yeah, it's a fascinating snapshot, isn't it? The Economist article frames Merz as the Außenkanzler, the foreign chancellor. It even suggests he might be Germany's last chance to avoid a hard-right government taking power, which is quite a claim. But as we unpack this today, you'll quickly see there's a much more nuanced story behind those headlines. We'll be challenging some of those initial assumptions, I think, and offering a broader, maybe more structural view of the political currents really shaping his chancellorship, both at home and abroad.
Okay, let's get into it. The Economist kicks off by highlighting Merz's unusual start. He actually needed a second ballot to secure the chancellorship back on May 6th. That immediately signaled, a wafer-thin majority in the Bundestag, and a pretty fragile coalition. This coalition, his Christian Democrats, their Bavarian sister party, the CSU, and the Social Democrats, the SPD, clearly began with less than, let's say, full loyalty within its own ranks. And almost straight away, Merz embarked on this whirlwind of international trips. Paris, Warsaw, Brussels, Kiev, then a key visit to America. That intense schedule quickly earned him that Außenkanzler tag back home. On the surface, though, that sounds like a success story, doesn't it? The article notes his prominent role in Ukraine peace talks, Germany stepping up as a leading voice internationally, and even, maybe surprisingly, an easy rapport with Donald Trump, which, as you said, is no small feat for a European leader these days.
Well, what's really interesting here is how you interpret that initial abroad first framing. While The Economist might imply a certain maybe vanity or perhaps suggest it was a distraction from domestic stuff, if you actually look at the record, it suggests it was much more of a strategic front load of foreign policy. You have to consider the context. We're talking about a high-risk year for European security, the war in Ukraine still raging, big geopolitical shifts happening. So Merz's rapid engagement in key European capitals, Kiev, Washington, it wasn't just for show. It was a highly rational move, really. He needed to signal a clear reset on Ukraine coordination and, crucially, manage that relationship with Donald Trump, especially with the optics of a potential future Alaska summit kind of looming. It wasn't just travel for travel's sake. It genuinely paid some very real diplomatic dividends, reassuring allies, setting Germany's stance firmly.
Right, that makes sense. A strategic necessity almost. But let's bring it home now, because domestically, The Economist paints a dramatically different story. It's like those foreign policy wins just aren't translating. After just 100 days, Merz's popularity was lagging, way behind his predecessors. He registered, only 32% satisfaction? Compare that to 56% for Olaf Scholz at a similar point, and a remarkable 74% for Angela Merkel. And maybe even more worrying for the German political establishment, polls from major broadcasters like ARD, institutes like INSA, they suggest the hard-right AfD, the alternative for Germany, is gaining serious ground. In fact, 68% of Germans, according to these polls, actually expect an AfD state premier in next year's regional elections. In states like Saxony-Anhalt, that's significant. The Economist puts a lot of this down to Merz's so-called CEO style, describing him as maybe an inexperienced politician who rammed through policies and ruffled feathers with a peremptory style, leading, they say, to a number of domestic storms.
And this raises a really important question for you to think about. Is it purely about personal style? Or are deeper, maybe structural issues at play that The Economist might be underplaying a bit? The article rightly points to that wafer-thin majority Merz has. That's absolutely real, no question. But the inherent coalition math explains much more than just a CEO style or, him being personally brusque. Think about the deal that formed the CDU-CSU-STD coalition. It gave the Social Democrats the powerful finance brief. Now, that's not just a cabinet post. It acts as a very real structural break on any, let's call it, unilateralism from the Kanzleramt, the Chancellor's office. That built-in governmental fragility, it colors everything. It means pushing through bold, fast policies like a CEO might want to is incredibly difficult. You always need to negotiate, compromise. The system itself is built for that complex consensus building, which, can look like stumbling when a leader wants to drive change quickly. So what seemed like a personal stumble might actually be the system forcing compromise. Slow, frustrating sometimes, but maybe essential for stability.
That's a crucial distinction, isn't it? It's not just being Merz, but the very fabric of German coalition politics kind of forcing his hand. Okay, let's look at some specifics. These domestic storms The Economist highlighted. In July, there was that very public constitutional court fiasco. Merz actually had to cancel a parliamentary vote on 3 judicial appointments. This happened after CDU-CSU deputies rebelled quite openly against nominating Froke, Brosia Skersdorf, a respected law professor. Their opposition was mainly about her liberal views on abortion. Merz himself called the attacks personal defamation. She eventually withdrew.
And what's really key here, I think, is that while it definitely hurt Merz politically, it was a significant embarrassment. It wasn't just invented by the press. That CDU-CSU rebellion over abortion views, it was very public, very real. It signaled clear caucus management problems within his own party, a leader struggling to keep his parliamentary group in line, even on key appointments. That reflects deep internal divisions, dissent that goes beyond just a top-down mistake by Merz. It suggests a party grappling with its own internal coherence and a leader who, despite those foreign policy successes, faces big challenges uniting his base on sensitive domestic stuff. The fallout wasn't just image, it hit the government's perceived stability.
Then, on August 8th, The Economist points to another case, Merz's decision to halt German exports to Israel, specifically weapons usable in Gaza. Reportedly, this was done without consulting his coalition partners, or even key state premiers like Markus Söder, the CSU leader. This gets presented as another prime example of that peremptory style.
Yeah, and if we connect that to the bigger picture, the problem wasn't necessarily the policy itself. Germany's relationship with Israel is complex, historical obligations. The Gaza situation is incredibly sensitive. The fundamental issue was the process. Minimal coalition consultation on something as sensitive, as diplomatically charged as arms exports. That certainly reinforces the top-down caricature The Economist painted. It really highlights communication breakdowns within the coalition, which can easily look like a management-style issue, even if the policy itself might have had, broader support or a solid rationale behind it. In a coalition, trust and consultation are just paramount. Bypassing them, especially on foreign policy, moves with domestic weight. That erodes political capital fast.
Makes perfect sense. Communication is everything in that kind of setup. Now, The Economist also singled out Merz for, and this is their phrase, ramming through a loosening of Germany's balanced budget rules before even taking office. That sounds pretty bold, if it's true, and a big shift from past CDU thinking.
Okay, but this raises an absolutely critical point about timing and context. Something The Economist's framing might, gloss over, calling this a Merz solo ram-through. It misses a fundamental detail. Germany actually amended its basic law, its constitution, back in March. And crucially, this was before Merz even took office. They did it to carve out defense spending, create this giant investment fund. This wasn't some unilateral act by Merz just showing up. It was passed by a 2/3 Bundestag majority. That means both CDU, CSU, and the SPD co-sponsored it. And it got Bundesrat assent. The Bundesrat, for listeners, is the upper house. Representing the federal states, it holds real power. So while Merz might be taking a political hit now for this perceived shift, it's more about maybe a U-turn against past CDU rhetoric or inheriting a policy shift than about him steamrolling institutions. The structural change was negotiated across the political camps, anchored in constitutional law, not something Merz did by himself upon arrival.
That's a really important clarification on the debt brake situation. But it does make you wonder, if the constitutional changes had such broad support before he took office, why is Merz getting the political heat now? Is it just poor communication? Or something deeper about perception?
I think it's probably a bit of both, honestly. On one hand, the opposition, maybe even some within his own party, can frame it as departing from traditional CDU fiscal conservatism. Makes Merz look inconsistent. On the other hand, these complex constitutional things, the public often sees the effect, right? Higher spending, new debt. And they attribute it to the current leader, regardless of the detailed history. It highlights that classic challenge for leaders, managing a legacy you inherit while trying to set your own course, all under intense scrutiny.
Right. And pushing that narrative of domestic struggles further, The Economist suggests Merz is delivering nothing at home. They focus on rising corporate insolvencies, higher unemployment, and that broken promise on lowering electricity prices.
While delivering nothing might be, let's say, a bit strong, to be fair. While those criticisms are definitely tangible, they resonate with people, there are early domestic actions that have been taken. You can point to things. For instance, there's a pretty significant $46 billion growth booster package that's already passed. That's not nothing. It's designed to get capital into businesses through things like accelerated depreciation up to 30% a year and even 75% 25% in the first year for EVs to try and spur green investment. Will it work immediately? Maybe not, but it's a tangible effort. We also see a scheduled step down in the federal corporate tax rate starting in 2028. A signal to business, sure, but the delay to 2028, that's a fair criticism given the current slump. And on migration, they have implemented tighter border controls, looking at rejections under a specific part of the asylum law, paragraph 18 SLG, which sets out certain grounds for denial. These are incremental steps, yes, and the lag on tax relief is a valid point. But they're tangible actions, not quite nothing.
Okay, so some action, but maybe not addressing the immediate pain points people feel. On the economy specifically, The Economist notes climbing corporate insolvencies and an unemployment rate of 3.6%, which, they point out, is low internationally.
Yeah, and this is where nuance really, really matters, especially for how things feel inside Germany. Corporate insolvencies, they are indeed at decade highs. That's a major headwind for any chancellor, hard to spin positively in the local papers. And unemployment, while that 3.6, 3.7% ILO rate, the international standard, is low globally. Germany also uses its own national metric from the Federal Employment Agency, the BA. And that number typically runs closer to 6%. The Economist piece uses the lower ILO figure, but doesn't really mention this dual metric thing, which is crucial because it shapes German headlines. It affects how fragile people perceive the job market to be at home. So 3.6% sounds great internationally, but if your local paper is talking about the 6% BA figure, it creates a very different feeling about economic stability. It really shows how a leader's domestic image can hinge on which numbers get the spotlight.
And that broken promise on electricity prices, The Economist really flags that as a major point of domestic unhappiness, something everyone feels in their wallet.
Yeah, absolutely. That critique lands hard. It's a very real pain point. Household electricity costs in Germany are still among the highest in the world, and the coalition didn't extend that broader 2025 tax relief to households like many hoped. Instead, they signaled cuts starting from 2026, so the broken promise feeling. That's real for families and businesses. However, the timeline for these things is often tied up in complex budget cycles. That explains some of that promise gap. It's a genuine economic pressure point, but understanding the budget context adds, well, a layer of complexity. It doesn't make it feel better, but explains the delay.
Right, context matters, even if it doesn't pay the bills. Finally, The Economist positions Meritz's chancellorship as Germany's last chance to stave off a government run by the AfD. They cite those polls where the AfD sometimes edges ahead of the CDU. It frames the stakes as incredibly high, almost existential.
Look, the AfD surge is definitely real, undeniable. And there are widespread expectations now of AfD-led state governments in next year's Länder elections, the regional votes. But portraying Merz as the only firewall, that might be dialing up the drama just a touch. A bit melodramatic, perhaps. Federal power in Germany still runs through incredibly complex coalition arithmetic, and there's still a pretty durable cordon sanitaire, basically, that political exclusion zone the mainstream parties maintain around the AfD. They generally refuse to form coalitions with them at the national level. Now, could that change? Possibly. An AfD first-place finish federally without a majority, that would support the idea they have a high ceiling but low coalition potential. They get votes but can't govern. However, an AfD premier actually governing a state, that would be a genuine break from precedent, a major political shift. So it's a huge challenge, absolutely. But the political math at the federal level is still more complex than just one individual holding back the tide. The barriers are still pretty robust. For now.
Okay, so we've definitely gone beyond just the headlines of Merz's first 100 days here. While The Economist highlights what looks like a messy start, we've also explored how these powerful structural factors, that knife-edge majority, the SPD holding the finance brief, the Bundesrat having its say, might explain more of his struggles than just, his personality or style.
Which really leads to an important question for you, the listener, to consider. Will these slow-burn fiscal and industrial packages we talked about, plus the tighter migration controls, will they actually stabilize Germany's political center before that next critical round of state elections? Or, if corporate insolvencies keep climbing, if those national unemployment figures keep worrying people, and if energy relief stays backloaded, will that stumbling at home label just harden, regardless of how well Merz performs on the international stage? It's a real balancing act, and the outcome will likely define his chancellorship.
Thanks for listening. Follow us to stay updated with the latest insights on The Economist every day, and don't forget to like, comment, and share.